coaches, teachers, and families with bus driving. This was especially the case during COVID, when extracurricular activities were even more important for the kids' social development. But enough about me. I try and say one kind, unsolicited thing to someone or about someone every day, and today I'd like to give a big shout out to Jeremy Arsenault, your transportation director. He'll probably kill me when he hears that I'm up here, but first and foremost, I think he's a very, very decent man. I'm not in the district at the break of dawn, so I don't know what's going on 100% of the time. But as an administrator, a diesel mechanic, driver, and transportation director, the district is extremely fortunate to have Jeremy here, especially with his multitasking abilities. He always responds quickly to my questions, and I feel supported by him when there are questions about a trip, a bus, or a rare issue when something happens on a bus. I've seen a lot of changes in transportation in our district over the last 3 years, much of it related to staffing challenges, but it just seems to me that he's stabilized things a lot more this year. Sure, the challenges remain, but the district transportation feels better, at least through my lens. I credit Jeremy. All these factors make it easy for me to want to drive 30 minutes up 295 to serve your kids. So kudos to Jeremy for advocating for kids and his drivers, and for him trying to provide his drivers with the best possible vehicles to transport kids and coaches. He makes it easy for me to want to help him and the district whenever he needs it. Which leads me to my third thing. I watched the last school board meeting, and I was glad to see there is a concerted effort to continue vehicle replacement in the district. I know how hard budgeting can be, especially with so many competing forces of staffing, program, facilities, and capital expenses. I've been a municipal government volunteer, and I know it's tough. But please keep in mind that a bus is a driver's office. Like police, fire, and DPW staff, I think we need to provide modern, up-to-date vehicles. School drivers are no different. Newer vehicles have many more features, some of them safety-related compared with 8 to 10-year-old buses. We shouldn't ask our van drivers and bus drivers to drive high-mileage older vehicles. The same goes with the tractors, trucks, and mowers used by Jason Chisholm's outdoor maintenance group. By the way, have you ever noticed your schools the day after a winter storm? From the road all the way into and around the schools are spotless. All sidewalks, traffic circles are fully cleaned, and all snowbanks along the curbs are removed to ensure student safety. Vehicle traffic moves easily. Jason's team has high standards, and they couldn't do it without adequate equipment. In closing, let's remember that like any business, we have external customers, like students and families, and we also have internal customers who are the employees, the teachers, and supporting staff. I know there's always competing stakeholders in school systems chasing limited resources. You're doing the best you can. And I conclude with my heartfelt message to you, the school board. One of the greatest gifts in life we can give is a gift of volunteer time. Thanks for your service to RSU 5 and for your support of kids and staff. And thanks for listening.
Thank you. Any other? No. Okay. All right. We'll move on to number 8, which is the report from the superintendent.
Okay, just a quick one this evening. Announcing we have a new support staff hire. Emmy Stackpole will be a Laugh and Learn teacher at our wonderful new facility there on the Mass Landing campus. So welcome, Emmy.
Great. Thank you, Jean. All right. So we don't have any administrator report, board comments and committee report, policy review. I think since Michelle's away, she made this a very light agenda for me. All right, but we will go right to unfinished business, and with the budget review, start with Durham Community School.
Yeah, and actually, before Will comes up, just a few things I want to share with the board, if that's okay, under budget, just a couple of updates, because I try to update you right before we have our presentations. So I think, first of all, I just want to go back to looking at budget context for the board, to look at how the budget that's presented to you that will over the next several weeks was put together. We knew from the get-go we had some anticipated difficult, this would be an anticipated difficult budget years for the things we already knew. For example, we knew we anticipated reduction in subsidy due to our decrease in enrollment. And we also know that we had some negotiated contracts that we had to make sure that we fulfilled our obligations there. So those were some no's going into the budget process. And as I've shared with the board frequently, our administrative team, which includes all our building principals and all department heads, we actually started discussions in August because we knew this would be a tough year. I asked all those departments and principals to look deeply at our enrollment, look deeply at class size, and also look deeply at our programming. Our team set budget priorities, which were shared with you the first budget presentation we had. One that was important to us was that we maintain programming for our kids, including maintaining student supports. And the final priority for us was really looking at our infrastructure to make sure we're providing a safe learning environment for our kids and for our staff. And that, though we saw last week, that included things like our capital projects funding, looking at life safety, and also our fleet replacement. Each school and department submitted and we reviewed their budgetary requests. That was done back in December, believe it or not. They've been working on it at their building level, and that was reviewed by myself, the Assistant Superintendent, Director of Finance and Human Resources. We put all those requests together and looked at what that number becomes. And our full administrative team on several occasions we shared what that increase would be with initial requests. And just to remind the board in one of our slides, the initial request without adjustments to staffing was 8.47% increase. That's the year-over-year expenditure side, with a net tax impact of 10.71. And then that's when we were also looking at some proposed staffing reductions that were identified by our team. So my role for you is to recommend a budget to the board that meets the needs of our kids, but is also fiscally responsible. And this includes us all, making some difficult decisions, having some hard conversations, particularly when we're speaking about positions. And as I shared last week, that anytime we talk about a position, we know there's a face behind that position, and that makes it very difficult for that. So I just wanted to share some context with you. Some updates. There were some questions last week the board had regarding the reduction in the multilingual program. And so I'm looking carefully at that. We're doing some deeper looking into that with our administrative team and also with our ML teachers, who I actually had a meeting with them today, and it was nice to hear some additional feedback from them. So I'll be doing some more thinking about that as I collect some more data and coming back to the board to answer your questions and provide some information. And we'll do that when before deliberations at your March meeting. The handbook that you have, we've done some based on what you asked us to provide for you. There's some changes in the handbook that I'll point out to everybody. On page 2, we did move the FMS presentation from this evening to February 26th. On page 4. At the bottom, we were asked to provide the number of teachers by department at Freeport High School. And I know there was, the board received some information, today by the English department about numbers, and I know Principal Galko is going to share that clarification for you later on with those numbers. If you turn to page 5, we were asked to provide with you all, looking at the 24-25 budget and the 25-26 budget, what the number of ed techs were at each building. It was important that we divided them up between regular ed and special education. We did not put special education by school. We did a total number because that can change based on the needs of the students. And sometimes we know, for example, if a cohort of students might be, let's say, going from Mass Landing to Freeport Middle School, then we may shift ed techs based on needs. So that's why there's a total number there. You'll see a decrease of 7. That's your reserve accounts. Remember we put 7 ed techs in the reserve accounts that we created last year. So that's what that is there. So those are the numbers for this year and then for next year with recommended reductions. You turn to page 8. There's a bit of an adjustment here. We've heard from Region 10, and we had what they're looking at, and it was less than we had.
Page 7 for us.
Oh, it's on a different page to me. It's page 8 for me.
Page 7.
It says superintendent's proposed budget.
Okay, maybe it's just me. I'm on page 7. I'm the weird one, I guess. Okay, never mind.
Okay, so page 8. So there was a little bit of difference in dollars there, about $16,429. So that reduced your total operating budget down to 5.69%. So there's a little bit there. So we adjusted that based on the information. And then when you turn to the last 2 pages about the budget summary, pages 9 and 10, that's adjusted accordingly based on what we now know about Region 10. If you move to page 11, I know we've had some questions from the board about federal funding because on the national level, there's been some conversation about nationally about what would happen with the federal funds. So what we've done here for you is provided you with all the federal funds we received. Those are not part of your local budget; those are separate. But to talk a little bit about what those title grants are and what we use them for. For example, Title I at the top, that's for disadvantaged students. And right now, that funding is used for 1.9 FTE classroom teachers at Pownell, Moore Street, and Mass Landing. And you may say, how can you have a 0.1 at Pownell? That's because 0.1 is funded through Title I. The rest of that position is funded through the local. So that those people are actually full-time people, but only portions of their position are funded through Title I. Title II, that's where you see us teacher and principal training recruitment. That's where we provide PD to folks. That comes from that money. On Title III, that's language instructions for English learners and immigrant students. That can be used to support English language acquisition and academic content instructional programs, PD, and parent, family, and community engagement. And the last group of federal funds we receive is IDEA. That's your own local entitlement grant for special education. Right now, that's used primarily for out-of-district placement tuition for some of our students. We have 5 ed techs funded through there. And then we also have some specialized instructional supplies and testing materials for our psychologists. The next box you see down there, we went back since FY22 to current. That's our allocation that we receive, and as you know, it's a reimbursement model. So if you look at FY25, if you look at all those title grants, and the most money we receive obviously is Title I and local entitlement. It's almost $1 million this year that we receive, and we're used to fund all those things. And on the bottom, we have a graph of that to graph that out for you. So just to give some perspective, when folks are thinking, my gosh, what happens if we don't have federal funding? We would have to come up with about $1 million. And we don't know our allocation for next year yet. And those are our updates for now based on some of the information the board asked for. I know there's some other questions we're looking for the March meeting, and Kelly has another quick update she'd like to share with you.
Well, I really just want to clarify. So page 7, On page 7, the CTE or Region 10 money is in fact identified on there. We had originally proposed a $26,071 increase. It came in slightly less by $9,642, and so that reflects an increase of the 16,429. So there was a little note on page 7 for that, and then going into page 8, that just puts it in a summary form of what the new number is. So their percent increase is 5.67. So I just wanted to clarify that.
That's why you were looking at 7, Beth. I was a page ahead.
Yeah, at least it's on both places, so I was looking at it in the right way. Anyway, okay, thank you. Okay, so, all right, then we have the update from the superintendent, so we will move on to Durham Community School with Will Pidden.
Evening, everybody. My goal this year was not to confuse everyone. I'm just going to warn you right now, I think I've already failed before we even start. But I practiced with Jean earlier, and then we debated whether I should bring a whiteboard. And it was agreement that at this point in my career, we should not need a whiteboard to explain it. So I'll do my best. And there are a couple of tricky spots that may get a little confusing, but don't hesitate to ask for clarity, and then just cross your fingers you get it. So you have the sheets, I believe, in front of you. I think Jean framed the approach well for us. It sort of saves me saying it. It's been work we've really done as a whole team, as an administrative team, and I would just stress that, you know, we look across the schools when we work as a team of principals and directors. You'll have seen different schools over the last few years where perhaps a priority was for one thing and not another school. And I think we all try to balance that also year by year by thinking as systemically as possible. So just so you all know, and I think you take this for granted anyway, but the principal and director role, we look at the whole district every time. So whilst we are responsible for certain schools or certain departments, the lens we use is always sort of systemic. And, you know, that differs school by school, department by department, need by need. So I think when we bring these to you, this is information that our colleagues are aware of and that we've all just sort of discussed whether these sort of fit in the district plan. So the summary gives you an example at the very beginning of the sheets you have in front of you. Projected enrollment numbers. We are looking at how can we support a fiscally responsible budget whilst meeting the needs of all our students, and you'll also see there's a specific request we have as well. We are looking at reducing a teaching role that, again, as Jean stressed, not necessarily a person from one of these teams, but to support the students at these respective levels. So rising fourth grade for our rising third grade for next year would go to 2 sections from 3, which would result in class sizes of 22. And our rising fifth graders would also go from 3 sections into 2, which would give us class sizes currently of 21, 22. I'm going to speak to that in a little more detail in just a moment. The box you have that on your charts that sort of just speak back to last year. So just to touch base on the additions we had last year. The wellness teacher we added has been incredibly helpful. Having that position, it allows our classes to receive the curriculum that they did not necessarily have access to, especially as we move to this time of year, and for our upper grade students around some of the health programming. It also, by adding in an extra class to our specials rotation, allows classes in specials to match class sizes that are in the classroom. Prior to that, we were having to condense classes to make them bigger to fit them in within the class options we had available. The guidance counselor, which you had helped us support from a 0.5 to a 1.0 last year, that additional 0.5, again, has made a big difference. It really has supported us in being able to provide some proactive work, as well, not just sort of responsive work through the guidance program. And also, as we talked about in the past, it really allows those two counselors now to support the pre-K families entering school, sometimes starting schooling for the very first time with their families, as well as then the transitions for 8th graders up into high school. So both those additional roles have been very impactful. Thank you. We added an academic leadership team member last year, one of the stipends. That had been a zero net impact because we had compacted some other stipends, but that equally has allowed us to get good representation on our school leadership team that covers across all our grade levels. You'll see in that box next to that, as I just mentioned to you, about reducing a couple of teaching roles at the school. There is an additional request, and that is to fund an educational technician, an EdTech 3, to support MTSS model that we have, specifically in what we refer to as RTIB. That's supporting students with some behavioral goals or with executive functioning goals that really help them then access their learning. The reason it's focused specifically at grades 5 through 8 is that we have a pretty robust program K through 4. But it does not, we have nothing at the moment in 5 through 8. So whilst we would love to believe that all problems are solved by the end of 4th grade, reality is, as we know, kiddos grow at different rates, development at different rates. We have students who move in who perhaps have not come through the foundational work that we've provided, and those needs exist across our upper grades. We've tried different ways to meet that. They cannot be in the same space because, as you can imagine, a 7th grader working through some specific skill building along with a 1st grader is just that they have different needs, different reactions to some of the challenges that they are working through. So whilst we have tried every model we can think of without adding to a program, we have come to the conclusion we need to replicate what we have in K4 up in the 5-8 range, and we believe we could do that by the addition of one ed tech. So that would be the additional staffing request for next year. There, you'll see also on there is a request for $12,402. That is for staffing for summer school. I think you perhaps heard from Holly Johnson last week that the summer program we've been able to provide the last few years was very dependent on federal funding that was part of the COVID relief funding that is now phased out. The program we have offered in the past, we've compacted it a little bit to out of respect for the fact that this funding would shift to local funds. But what this allows us to do is to support our students who are already in MTSS work and for whom this maintains their hard-fought gains that they've made during the year. So what this money provides is for 2 teachers and 2 ed techs. We work with about 25 students for a month in July with morning programming that replicates the work they're doing during the school year. So it's reading and math support, continuing the work they've been doing. And as I say, I would say sometimes it results in a good gain over the summer, but for the most part, it's really about maintaining, sustaining sort of like all the gains that they have worked so hard to achieve and not have to sort of like reset and start again. So those are the sort of like the main pieces. There are a couple of other pieces that I would just like to talk to you about relative to enrollment numbers. Specifically, if you look at the I'm not sure what you have in terms of pages, but it would be the second table in however your page is formatted. That is the table that represents the proposal that we have made. There are just a couple of things to sort of highlight in these numbers. So the first place I want to start, just bring your attention to, is kindergarten. That is an anticipated number that we are monitoring closely because currently that number is lower than anticipated. We're not quite sure why, but we are watching it closely. What we usually do with kindergarten estimates is obviously we take a look at what we have in pre-K, and we look at the birth data over a 2-year span that represents the children 5 years later, which is when they would be entering kindergarten. That is usually a pretty solid estimate of what we would expect, even though obviously some people may have moved out, some people may have moved in. So the birth data from those specific years looks as usual, as it would usually in Durham, which is usually in that range of like 38 to 42 children. So that would indicate we should be anticipating a typical kindergarten enrollment. The reason there's some doubt about it is just that our pre-K numbers this year are a lot lower than they have been the last couple of years. It's not quite explainable. We have certainly tried to gather some of that information. We had done some family surveys back in November when the budget process started. We have put out reminders through the Durham town media sites as well, and we have another piece coming out. And we've obviously sent it through email through the school network. But if these are families who perhaps don't have children already in school, our hypothesis had been a little bit that because we offer half-day pre-K across our district, and a lot more families are back at work now than they were in the last few years, and half-day pre-K is not easy in Durham. There's not many other sort of like care providers that will do half a day. So a number of families need full day care. And in those circumstances, what we have found over the years is families tend to then get care or preschool experiences for their children in the towns in which they are working. Therefore, the commute, or if they need to go check in on their child, it's right, they're right there. So it's not quite as straightforward as checking with local daycares to sort of check on numbers. So we are continuing to monitor that. It is currently at 33, but we will, there's the piece that gets a little tricky is most families just take it for granted the child's going to go to kindergarten, and sometimes we don't get registrations till quite late. But we are pushing hard to get that information. So we'll keep you updated on that one. The other grade level I wanted to just bring to your attention, which is a little misleading, is in 8th grade. So you'll see there it says 48 with 2 teachers. And on the other table you have, which is what would these numbers look like with current staffing, that also shows 48 with 2. What you need to know is that our current 8th grade is actually 37. So those 2 teachers with 37 is a very different equation than 2 teachers with 48. Ours is always a little tricky to communicate because if you're not aware, in our school, our 7th and 8th grade students have the same teachers. They loop with these teachers. So our science teacher, for example, this current year teaches 3 sections of 7th grade and 2 sections of 8th grade. So it's not quite as straightforward as here's a 7th grade team, here's an 8th grade team. At our school, it is here's the 7th and 8th grade team, and this is how the classes are divided, if that makes sense. So this is one that we've been working closely with the team on, and we don't anticipate it requiring an additional teacher, but what we are working on is potentially looking at that. That cohort is currently in 3 sections as 7th graders. The team that we have identified a potential solution where if we're utilizing our JMG program with all our 8th graders, as well as our Spanish with all our 8th graders, that gives us the capacity to have 6 teachers across the 7th and 8th grade, which then would bring that number per class size down from 24 down to 16s. The reason we're kind of monitoring it a little bit is that so many of our numbers are sort of cuspy. It's one of the challenges of the size of the school. When we are in the 50s, it's easy. It's 3 classes. You hit 51, it's 3 classes of 17, and all of a sudden you can accommodate another, 9 students, and you're still at 3 classes of 20. So in that size, it's far more flexibility. It's one of the things that we talk about with Moore Street, Mars Landing, Freeport Middle, where the school numbers are that bit bigger. The ability to accommodate some numbers until they get to a cusp number 2, obviously, it gives some flexibility. So if we were, for example, to have some students move out of 8th grade, well, then we may pivot and go in 2 sections. But we feel we have a plan either way. But I wouldn't say to you that as of tonight, that is hard and fast concrete. What I'd say to you is that we feel like the staffing we're requesting allows us to run school without a compromise and sort of meet the needs we have whilst we're monitoring K, 3, and 5, just because 4 in or 4 out either way just sort of makes a difference for us. I think that's about it.
All right, thank you very much. Questions? Okay, Kelly.
So I guess the obvious question is, since these numbers are really cuspy and some of these classrooms really are kind of right on the edge of being what is considered acceptable, do you have any kind of contingencies in case you do get some unexpected students in the district in these classes?
Well, contingency right now, of course, is, as you're sort of seeing, is that, for example, if K didn't build, then potentially there's the capacity for a reduction there. If the numbers do increase, then we would be saying, okay, we've got to revisit. But it's one of those hard, if we have 2 families can move in with 4 kids across 1 grade level. But it's usually if we anticipate the number of move-outs and move-ins will be kind of offsetting, then that is kind of like what we'll be looking at. But we worked through this since November with Jean and looking at numbers, and I think 5th grade we definitely have a little leeway for what may move in. The 8th grade, I've already mentioned to you, we have a plan for like a reduction or a build, and other than that, I think we're pretty secure with where we're at. If we have a big move in, then it becomes problematic. But that would be the same in other times also.
Kara?
It sounds like you'll be doing a lot of monitoring of those numbers.
Yeah.
How much in previous years, how much does the number change between this time of year and August? Or even late spring?
Yeah, I don't know if I could accurately answer that. I mean, I'm perfectly comfortable to wing it, but I'm not sure that would really answer your question accurately. I don't have the metric to say, all right, from this, from February of 24 to September of 24, this was a shift in enrollment. We could look. I'm not sure how transferable it is. Housing has become so expensive over these last few years. It's definitely impacting, it's impacting in 2 ways. It's impacting in terms of people who may be able to buy a house. And what we saw right after COVID was sort of an increased number of people moving back in with family. So it might be a parent of some children moving in with their parents, for example. So that's a little unanticipated. So we definitely have had sort of multi-generational families kind of like condensing into like housing just because of the expense. So that sort of made it a little less predictable. I think what is tricky would be if we had a number, it would be like as a overall population impact. So for example, I might say, oh, there was 10 more students than we anticipated or 10 less, but that would be across all 10 grade levels. It could have been clustered in 2 grades, not the 10. So to break that down, I don't think there's a predictable pattern that one could transfer to a specific grade. That's the challenge. If that makes sense.
Mara?
Thank you so much, Will, for this information. And you did such a great job explaining this clearly. So I apologize in advance if now I'm going to trip you up by asking for clarification.
You could have just left it right out. You did a brilliant job.
I'm sorry.
That may be my takeaway.
Oh, I'm sorry. Could you say again what you said about the 8th grade and the adding the JMG and Spanish teachers and the class sizes?
Yes. Yeah. This is definitely the one that is a bit confusing. Currently, our 8th graders do have JMG and Spanish, but it is a split class. So about how it works is that currently this year in 7th grade, all 7th graders take Spanish and all 7th graders take JMG. Then for 8th grade, they get to choose. So what happens is, this is where it gets a little murky without the whiteboard that I don't have here. I could wave my arm around as if I'm writing, if that would help. But so it creates, although we have 5 sections this year: science, humanities, math, language arts, and then this 5th section is quote-unquote Spanish JMG. In 7th grade, they take it every other day. So they have Spanish one day, JMG the next. In 8th grade, they get to choose one or the other to sort of specialize. And numbers roughly work out about half and half. So then about half our 8th graders take JMG in this 5th section, and the other half of that class of whatever number, 22, would then take Spanish, which means that during that section of 8th grade, when they were in Spanish or JMG, they might be in a class of about 11 because they've split. What we're proposing we would do next year with this number, if this is what it looks like, is what we are currently doing in 7th grade, but rather than have Spanish one day, JMG the next, they would have it as part of that. They'd have Spanish and they'd have JMG. So their 6 classes would be science, math, language arts, humanities, JMG, and Spanish. So currently, sort of Spanish JMG creates 1 section. What we're proposing is that would create 2. I'm not sure if this helps at all. I feel like I should be like a shadow puppet or something.
And here I am. Okay. I just have a question around how does that work, like time-wise, as far as in this, how like adding another?
Yeah,
period
good
or-
question. That's the piece we definitely wrestle with, and we have spent quite a bit of time kind of work through that because, as you're rightly predicting, you know, if you add a 6th section, it's taking out of the current 5 sections. What we and actually, I was just meeting with the team today, and you know, we're super fortunate. They're real problem solvers. They're very good at knowing what the key learnings are that they anticipate that 7th and 8th graders should get, and you know, and then looking at how that would occur. So we have been going back looking at schedules that we had this 6 sections during COVID when we had to keep spacing was so important, and we had to keep smaller class sizes. In order to get everybody back in, we added a 6th section back then. And what we did is we added in a reading class so that the students had reading and writing as separate sections rather than the ELA, which is what it is. So we've gone back to revisit some of those schedules. One of the things that we had looked at is having 6 classes with multiple transitions. That's where you eat up some time. Equally, we're very invested in students having a rich science experience, and already it's like 44 minutes, which is kind of minimal. So to reduce that anymore really impacts the capacity to do labs and things like that. So our current model, and I'm sorry that I'm just keep saying current, but these are dynamic decisions, as you might imagine. We keep looking at what we're working with and looking at what we want to achieve, and then the resources we have to achieve it. So our current thinking on this, as of this morning, is that we would go back to what we did during that time in 2020, 2021, where we had a sort of mix of block schedule and some individual. So it would, a student day, they would have like an 80-minute science and say an 80-minute humanities, and then like a
Creative thinking, so.
That's a very polite way of saying
and
it.
a lot of moving pieces there, so. Any other questions for Will? Colin?
Thanks, Will. I tried to do some math, and I normally cheat off of Moon, but he wasn't doing these particular equations, so I couldn't cheat off of him today. Thanks, Moon. But I'm just trying to work out if we move the 3rd grade to 2 teachers, and we move 5th grade to 2 teachers, we then have the next year 53 and 56 coming into there, which gets us into, again, I couldn't cheat off Moon, but are between 26 and 28 students. So help me.
So what happens is, and we've been doing this for years with 2s and 3s. It's only you'd probably, if you were to go back through these sheets of paper that I presented to you over the last number of years, it's gone from saying we've gone from 4 grade levels of 3 sections and 6 grade levels of 2 to 5 and 5 to 6 and 4 to 7 and 3. So we have always sort of dealt with cuspy numbers. We've definitely had an increase in population the last number of years. This is the first year in a long time that we've had a reduction of about 15 children compared to what we had last year. What happens there, Colin, specifically, is that the following year there would be 3 sections for the 3rd grade, because that's what needs to happen. A teacher would move from another grade into 3rd grade, because that following year's 4th grade would be at 2. So it means that if those numbers stayed as they are, and they're sort of like still like a 2 and a 3, a grade level increases by a teacher and not by a teacher. So 2 years ago, our 6th grade had 2. This current 8th grade, as 37, has always been a smaller class. They fluctuated a little bit between sort of like 41, 37, and they've always been in 2 sections. So 2 years ago, 6th grade had 2 sections. And the following year, the last 2 years, this bigger number has been behind them. So 6th grade became 3. And so that's what would happen. If the numbers, if a cohort can be taught in 2 sections, they travel through as 2. It's one of the tricky parts of this, is that if you're in a smaller cohort of 3, but it's still a cuspy low number, but in 3, that cohort is fabulous for them, because their whole schooling, they're in smaller classes compared to what a cohort of 53 or 54 would be, where there's just more kids in the same number of classes. It's not quite that, you had this great year where it was a bit, there was a different population size in your classes to benefit from as like a little boost. They have that their whole time. A bigger group has the opposite their whole time. So we would, if the numbers stayed viable, then we just shift the numbers from a 3 to a 2.
So yeah, I mean that makes sense to me. It seems like there's always going to be a certain amount of horse trading that's happening between grades. I guess I'm looking at it from kind of a sort of, I guess, grossly within that horse trading. If like we're now sort of saying, all right, if we have 486, we previously were doing that with 27.5, and now we're saying we can do it with 25.5. So we're just kind of the argument is we can teach that many students with that many teachers in some different arrangements based on how things add up. Is that a fair way of thinking about it?
Sort of. It depends where they fall. So right now in that 486, pre-K is an estimate and K is an estimate. So if I was to say, in pre-K, cap is 48. We have 3 sections. And last year we were at like 43 in there. We had our biggest pre-K. And at that point we were like, oh, this is great. The community has found ways to support half-day pre-K. So this year was a complete surprise when we had the opposite. But if those reality of those numbers is not 40 and 45, but 30 and 40, it's not 486, it's 470, 471. So it's tricky across 10 grade levels to kind of use the total number. It really is that section by section. And we, your observation is correct. I don't mean to suggest otherwise, is that there's all sorts of ways to say, yeah, this would be helpful and this would be helpful and this would be helpful. But we also, are well aware, and I sort of, in a way, I bring this back to where I started, which is collectively as sort of the principals and directors, we're well aware of the sort of fiscal demands that not only now, but potentially ongoing, that we have to just sort of be able to look at. Right, we've had some great supports that we were able to really lean on through some of the additional funding that came with COVID, that money's not there. And yet some of those programming needs we developed from that, we've added in, not least of which, you were super supportive last year with some of the social and emotional supports that we put in place around wellness, around additional guidance, supporting us with our Character Strong curriculum. And so on one hand, it costs more from some of the impacts of that time period, but then we had this extra money. So I think that, we had sort of talked about it at one point. So the metaphor was that it's like in essence, like a plant that sometimes you have to cut back for it to grow because the needs are going to continue to evolve. So in order for us to continue to grow, like we're asking for an ed tech for MTSS at the upper grades, we have to sometimes sort of like prune it to grow it. And I think it's just a reality that we're all trying to, figure out the best way to do it.
Any other questions for Will? Oh, Mara?
Thanks again, Will. I'm just looking at, and maybe this is a question for Jean, I'm just looking at the threshold action levels and then thinking about what on the class size policy that was provided to us. This was very helpful. Thank you, Ginny, or whoever put that in there. And wondering what happens if, we do exceed that 24 per class, or would we take action? I see that the board would be notified. Would some action happen automatically, or then would the board have to discuss that and consider what would happen?
That's where we would lean back in at the school level. And I think Emily and Julie spoke last week to this as well, is that it also depends on the cohort and the group of kids. That a class of 20 can feel like a class of 30, perhaps, based on the needs, but a class of 24 can be more like a class of 18 based on the needs. So it would be really looking at the building level what their needs are. And sometimes in the past we've done nothing. Sometimes we add techs, sometimes we add teachers, but really leaning back in on what the building needs would be with that. And I think, again, that, this is just that's where, and by your own policy, that those are some of the things we do. Sometimes we don't do anything. Sometimes we add staff, really based on, we'd go back and look at what the needs of those kids are.
All right.
That's all right. Sounded like a seltzer.
Okay. All right. I think we're all set. Will, thank you very much.
All right. If you need any more hand explanations,
All right, we know where
I'll be
to
sitting
come,
at the
yeah.
back.
Okay, so we will move on to Freeport High School with Jen Golko.
Good evening, everybody. Jen Golko from the high school. I wanted to start this evening with talking about the budget request that we had for last year and how that has impacted our work this year, and then shift into what we are requesting and proposing for the coming school year. So for this current school year, we requested and are grateful to the board for the support of adding a 0.5 science teacher. This really supported us in being able to post for a full-time position, which gave us a great pool of applicants, and we were able to hire a very strong educator who's here in our science department with us now. And fun fact, she was with us before and then came back to us, so we're even happier about that. She was with us a few years ago. It also enabled us to increase our elective offerings that we have for students, including our Gulf of Maine Field Studies course, which is the course that is our only dual enrollment course with UNE. So that has been quite popular and quite successful, and just a wonderful class. So we're grateful to have the ability to add that. The second addition that we had last year was the stipend for the standardized testing coordinator. Again, we are very grateful for that support because that has helped us to manage the increased demands that we have on the testing coordination, which, for example, all of the AP tests shifting to digital or a hybrid of digital, the SAT and the PSAT shifting to digital has been a learning curve and a challenge with technology. And so this stipend position has really helped for our school counselor team in particular. So for this coming year, what we are asking for one significant increase, which is to the guidance secretary position. That is the person who functions as our registrar for our school. And so the registrar, if you're not familiar, is the person who is in charge of transcripts, which we know is incredibly important, in charge of storing grades, supporting scheduling, amongst other things that they manage. And so this request would enable us to increase the number of hours and days that that person is working. Our current person is, we are incredibly fortunate to have the person in that role, and she is retiring. And so this schedule that she has right now has worked for her, and we're hoping to increase the number of days and hours so that it matches some of our other building secretaries, but also makes it a competitive posting when we post for that, because this is a role also that requires more and more technology knowledge. And so we're hopeful that with that increase, we would be able to have a great pool of applicants. And so then for the coming year, we have, as many before me have discussed, the challenges of a tight budget year, that we have some reductions that we are proposing. So I'll go through each one. Excuse me. The first one is the 0.5 world language position. For a little bit of history, we added this in the 2018-2019 school year. I was the one who requested it, was very grateful at the time. The challenge has been that over the last 7 years, we have had 5 different teachers, and 1 online teacher, which was very unsuccessful with that online program that we tried. And this year we have been covering these classes by sharing someone with the middle school. And then also we've been incredibly fortunate that one of our educators at the high school is certified in Spanish as well. She happens to be here tonight. And we have been very fortunate that she has been able to teach one section of that class. So we feel that this has been an incredibly difficult position to fill and have somebody who is retained with us. The majority of people, we've been happy for them that they have found full-time work. That has been usually the reason that they have left that position. We feel that we are able to still offer our courses that we currently offer by our team member who is currently teaching one class, that she is able to increase the number of classes that she's teaching. And she is currently in the role of our instructional coach for our teachers. So we feel that we will be able to still offer a great selection of world language courses while reducing that by that half-time position. The other position that we are proposing as a reduction is the 0.5 ELA position. Currently, what we have in our ELA department is 6 full-time teachers, 1 0.75 teacher, and 1 0.5 teacher. And so the full-time teachers teach between 5 and 6 sections, and then the 0.75 teacher teaches 4 sections, and the 0.5 teacher teaches 3 sections. One of the things that I wanted to share with the board is some updated numbers, which is a different breakdown, a much more specific breakdown than that overall picture of the range of class sizes. That is a format that we've used for year after year, as long as in the 10 years that I have been here. And when we can make that much more specific when we break that down. So I think that that's going to be helpful information for the board. So I have this form for you. So the document that's coming around to you is a breakdown for people in the audience. I'll read through what I'm sharing. It is a breakdown of, specifically for our ELA classes, of class sizes and averages. And there's 2 different ways that this is presented. This is the same information on just in 2 different formats. The top format was put together by our chair of the English department. And so this one is showing total number of students, total number of sections, and the average class size per course. So these are a general overview. You can see it's not listing all of the electives that we have, and it's not getting into the specific titles of the courses, but it's showing you an overview of ELA 9 versus ELA 10, 11, and so on. And then down at the bottom, you'll see that this is an additional chart, similar information. This is one that I put together with Charlie Mellon, and this is showing by teacher the number of students, the number of sections, and the average class size. And so you can see that where we are averaging around just under 16 students per class, depending on the course, depending on the grade level of those students. And you can see it varies slightly from semester to semester, but those numbers are very close. So a total number of 38 sections that we offer an ELA in semester 1, and 39 sections that we offer in semester 2, with an average class size of just under 16 for semester 1, and just over 15 for semester 2. And so when we are looking at this, we feel that these class sizes are numbers that we can continue to keep at a reasonable number if we are reducing that 0.5 position. The 0.5 position if we are distributing those students as equally as we possibly can. And that's one of the things that I'll talk about in a second, is the work that we are doing to try and really make the section numbers more equal. Instead of having an ELA class of 9 and another ELA class of 21, that we are really trying to work with our data specialist to balance out those numbers so that the course sections are more even. That is a really complex task because, excuse me, in a small school, the increase of classes that we offer, we have a great selection of courses here. Each one impacts the schedule and how classes are placed. But we are going to do more work with our data specialists in using technology to try and balance those classes. And so if we are able to do that and we're able to distribute these students, it's an average increase of 6 students per teacher, that if we are reducing this 0.5 position. And so the other thing that we are looking at is we have some elective sections that are very small, and we feel that we could reduce the number of sections without reducing the actual elective. So for example, if we have a sports media class, which is the one that Moon mentioned. They create this great magazine that was shared with students this week. We have 2 very small sections, and we might next year shift to running one section, one larger section, which then is able to help distribute the numbers and balance those out. And then our third reduction, kind of category of reduction that we are proposing, is for 3 general ed tech positions. Specifically, those positions right now have been slated, one as a guided study hall, which is our study halls that typically are for 9th graders, some for 10th graders, for our learning lab, which is our smaller study hall that's focused on executive functioning, and for the ed tech that is in the library. Currently, all 3 of those positions are vacant. There are some of those positions, like the guided study hall and the learning lab position, that we have had a high amount of turnover for the ed techs that are in those positions, and we have struggled to keep up with the numbers that are in those courses. And so one of the things that we are working on this year, and again, working on this with the data specialist, is that we are trying very hard to see if we can get all or most of our teachers at the high school teaching 5 sections instead of 6. The way that the contract reads right now is that everyone in the building has 6 of something. So for some teachers, that's 6 courses. For some, it's 5 plus an intervention class. For others, it's 5 plus a study hall. And what we are trying to do by working with the data and with PowerSchool is balance out those numbers so that the vast majority, if not all of our teachers, are teaching 5 courses and then have a support block, an intervention block, or a study hall. And so we feel that we are able to fulfill the roles of these ed techs, using learning lab, or covering learning labs, covering guided study halls, and supporting our librarian with that 6th block that teachers would have in order to cover one of those roles. I also think that we have struggled with the pool of applicants for the regular ed techs. Many of them are coming without any educational experience. Sometimes that works out wonderfully, and we've had some fantastic ed techs. Sometimes it doesn't, and it is incredibly challenging for us to have this high number of turnover, particularly in an intervention class, and feeling that our teachers, who we have an exceptional staff at the high school, that if they are in a support role, that they could give great support. If they are teaching 5 sections and then in a support role, we're able to increase those support, and they will be the support will be provided by a classroom teacher. So those are that's the overview. I'm sure there's questions for me, and just thank you for looking closely at all of these numbers.
Thank you, Jen. Any questions? I can go first. I have a question. I guess how long have we had this amount of English teachers at the high school?
So we increased, the teacher that's in the 0.75 position was a 0.5. I'd have to look back and see exactly what year, but that happened while I was here. So that's been in the last 10 years. And then we increased by another half of that position. So we've increased by 0.75.
And also, I'm just looking at the numbers in the bottom chart on the page that you handed out. And if I'm looking at this correctly, so like full-time teacher A, so they have 71 students, but then down in teacher F potentially has 90, which is almost 20 more, plus they might get 6 more. You know, I don't know. That seems like a lot. Is there usually that sort of a 20 student discrepancy between?
It depends. So that's where the courses that they are teaching come into play. And so in this particular case, that 90 is 12th graders. And so in the past, when we have been scheduling, we have looked predominantly at the younger grades to see if we can keep those numbers smaller than some of our upper grade level classes. Depends on the course though. But still, we're feeling like 18 students, so that there's 18 seniors in that room. Feeling like that has been a manageable size for those classes.
Okay, and just because I'm thinking of especially senior year, I know there's a lot of additional sort of demands on the seniors as far as, help with writing their college essays from their teachers and things like that. So it just seems like a really stark difference. And then to add more, to have that many more for a more difficult year stands out to me. But
No, it's a great question. And so that is the goal of trying to balance out those numbers, not just in courses of ELA 9 to ELA 9, but also across teachers. That's something that we've been talking a lot about and making sure in all of the departments that we're trying to balance those numbers. The challenge is that we also try to keep the number of different courses that a teacher has as low as we possibly can. So sometimes we might have a teacher who teaches 2 different classes and they have a higher total number of students than a teacher who teaches 3 different courses might have a slightly lower number. So sometimes that's the balance. And some teachers would prefer fewer students and more. We call that preps, different preps that they have, different courses that they have to prepare for. Some teachers would prefer fewer preps and more students, and some would prefer fewer students and more preps. And so that is something that we're constantly balancing. So there's only some places where when an absolute necessity where we go over 3 different courses that a teacher teaches. So examples of that would be visual and performing arts, world language, and PE health are times when they might have more than 3 different classes that they prepare for.
any other questions? Danielle?
Thank you, Jen, for that. Could you just go over just the explanation again about the reduction in the world language? So someone's going to pick up 2 more classes?
So we hope so. It depends on the numbers too. The challenge is that it is heavily reliant. I was like, she's excited. She's excited. Yes. So one of the things that's our challenge right now is that all of this is somewhat theoretical until we have course registration numbers. I will tell you that the other principals around us are sometimes surprised that how popular Latin is in our school. It's also Latin Club is the probably the most popular club in the school, and we're very proud of that. We have a great Latin program. But so the tide can shift sometimes. We saw in the last 2 years that our French numbers have increased, and so it's highly dependent on what the 8th graders choose, because they've been incredibly fortunate, which is not the case in every high school, that they've gotten their first choice of a world language almost every year. 1 year since I've been here, we had to do a lottery for Latin because we didn't have enough seats in a Latin course. And so it could be that we still need a certain number of sections for our 8th graders coming into 9th grade. It could be that we only need 2 additional sections instead of 3. Right now, 2 of the world language teachers are already at 5 courses. They have 5 plus a study hall. And so we have to look at how those numbers will balance out once we have the course registrations, which will be in the beginning of April.
Any other? Kara?
Thanks, Jen. This is helpful to explain how you see this all working out, and that there's a lot of balancing. And can you speak at all to any concerns you have, or any worries of consequences in particular of these reductions, like stretching teachers too thin, or kids not getting their needs met with the reduction? What are your concerns?
I think one concern is really seeing how possible it is to get everyone to 5. You know, I'm excited for that challenge because we've been talking about it since I got here. I think it predated me, is to think about, is that possible to get teachers to 5? While still being able to offer the huge range of courses that we have right now. And so I think that is one thing that we want to make sure that we are thinking creatively about that. So an example of that is when I presented the program of studies, that this is the first year that we're talking about alternating some classes. And so in year 1, we might offer A, B, and C classes. In year 2, we offer X, Y, and Z, and then we flip those. That's some creative thinking that some of the department chairs have come up with, that I think that we can try to problem solve some of those things to make sure that we are giving kids the best experience that we can. I think that it has been a concern to be able to fill these ed tech positions. So I think that that is a benefit of thinking about the teachers that are going to be able to go into the intervention classes. And of course, anytime we're trying something new, there's a concern of what's that load on everybody. But I think we have an outstanding staff, and I think we've done some creative problem solving to figure out how to make sure that we're still able to meet student needs and have great offerings for students while making things manageable for teachers.
Mara?
Thanks so much, Jen. This data that you pulled together is really helpful. I appreciate that. My question is somewhat similar to Kara's. So you may feel like you're just repeating your answer that you just gave, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Could you speak specifically to the ELA reduction and the impact that would have on students? I know we received some concerns from the teachers in the English department about the impact of the class size increases and the reduction in the teacher, and what impact that would have on instructional quality provided to the kids.
I think that if we are able to do this combination of balancing out the number of sections and potentially looking at reducing some of the numbers of sections that we offer, and doing both of those things, and then potentially rotating some of the electives that we offer, instead of having courses that have a total number of 8 or total number of 11, and then another course that is full at over 20 students. I think that if we are looking at those two things in combination, that I am definitely optimistic that we can still make sure that our kids are getting a great experience, that class sizes are reasonable, and that teachers are supported. I think that those two things put together, we have not tried those yet, of the balancing of the numbers and potentially changing some of the offerings that we have. I think that can be something that we'll be able to do.
Kelly.
So it, excuse me. So it sounds to me like this idea of being able to balance the classes using some new technology, is that something that is just kind of what hasn't been available in the past and you're trying to use to sort of make things work with a little bit less manpower than we have?
Yeah, so some of it was, not to get too technical with PowerSchool, but once you're entering all of the information into PowerSchool, because you can imagine it's a massive Jenga puzzle, because if you offer this class at the same time as this class, and there's a huge overlap in that, we need to try again and try again. And the technology can do that. Some of it, I think, we were leaving as is. So we might run it through the kind of technical side of PowerSchool once or twice, and then we leave it and say, well, this class has 9 and this class has 22, and we're just going to leave it like that. What we're going to try and do is see if we run it again and run it again. One other big piece that is a huge factor, again, not to get into the weeds of scheduling, but we have been incredibly fortunate to have, again, I was like, our instructional coach is coming into so many things tonight, but our PLCs are something that we are so proud of. We worked hard to have our PLC teams, which we meet incredibly frequently every other day. And we have been able to manipulate the schedule so that 4 math teachers are on the same team, or 5 science teachers are on the same team. And we have looked at that and talked about it with department chairs, that we might then have some of so that puts a significant constraint on the schedule, because I'm saying these 5 teachers cannot have any science class right now. And so some of the teachers have said, or department chairs have said, they're willing to split those teams smaller. So 2 math teachers on this team and 2 math teachers on that team. They're still able to collaborate and work on curriculum, but there's not as many constraints to the schedule. I think that's going to make a big difference too. And when we are looking at how the numbers of sections shake out, because that's one of the biggest factors into limiting what the schedule is. And so I still think that we can have great collaboration, and the work that we've done to work on curriculum, and just think about it in a different way and use our time in a different way.
Anyone else? Oh, okay, Maura.
Thanks again, Jen. I had a question on a completely different topic, actually. I was wondering if you've experienced any concerns shared by students or families about immigration enforcement in the school, and I'm asking about this as it pertains to the budget, specifically because of the law enforcement presence that we have in our school. So I was wondering if you could speak to that, if there has been any impact.
I think that, has there been any impact of parents asking me? I'm sorry, can you ask your question again?
Yeah, I guess if there's been any awareness, if this has come up at school, or concerns about it have been shared.
So we've talked as a staff, we've had guidance from the superintendent. We've had conversations across districts, high school principals, talking about the steps that we would take. And then I've had conversations with individual students, individual staff members, to talk about what our steps would be. I have not had any contact with any parents asking any questions about this, but we are following the guidance from the superintendent about how we will respond and support all of our students in the building.
Okay, thank you. So I guess I'm just thinking about, again, the law enforcement presence in our school with our SRO and the support that we provide to our students. And maybe if for later in the budget, maybe during our deliberations, we could get more information about I guess the local law enforcement interaction with immigration enforcement, if that makes sense. Like what role the SRO would play if there were to be students in our schools that would need to, that ICE would interact with. And what that I guess what that would look like. I guess I'll just share my concerns that there is that presence in our schools, given the current climate, and what can we do to make sure that all our students feel safe and welcomed in our schools. So thanks.
I can say that when I spoke to students, I shared with them that Officer Murray is someone who is a safe person that they can go to, and that she is someone who is supportive of all the students in our building. I can't speak to her role. I will say she spends a lot of time here with us, which we're grateful for. And so that has been the message here, that Officer Murray is another trusted adult that students can go to in the building.
All right. Last chance. Okay. All right. Thank you, Jen. Okay. So last up is athletics with Eric Hall.
Good evening. Thank you very much for having me up here. First thing I want to discuss is our middle school and high school athletic programs that we offer here in RSU 5. As you know, these are educationally based athletic programs for our middle schools as well as our high schools that allows for our student athletes to experience a learning environment that promotes safe, nurturing, and healthy activities outside the classroom. These goals of meaningful student-centered activities include responsibility for self as well as being a member of the team. So when we're creating a budget for athletics, we try to make sure that we have equitability across the board for both male and female, as well as both middle schools as well as high schools. In my experience as athletic director over the last 5 years, we've seen an increase in certain areas of the budget, and that really is more along the lines of our equipment. There's new safety measures, there's new products that come out, and so when we're building this budget, we have to look at that as well as some external factors that when I built this budget, as you know, we have officials, and the officials in the fall of 2022 for our main officials signed a contract with the Maine Principals Association that began in the fall of 2023, which was a 3-year contract, which had a 3% increase for varsity and JV officials. So that has to be factored in when we build this budget, to have that safety of an official that is a certified officials for all of our sports that we offer here. Another thing that is an external factor is we do have police coverage at some of our fall, especially our football games, all of our basketball games during the winter time, and maybe a few games in the spring to when we have high intensity games. The increase is the hourly wage for a police officer to be on coverage, as they call it, detail. Usually is after hours type work. So that has been an increase. We've also seen an increase this year in our budget of having an ambulance. We have an ambulance on site for our football games in case if something does happen. We have that to our ability to have in any safety measure. So that's been one of the biggest things that when we're creating this budget is to look at that. Another thing that is an external factor is we have both of our middle schools are in the same league. It's called the Triple C, and our high school is in the Western Maine Conference, and we have what is called association fees, which helps to pay for the assigners who assign the officials to our games, cost of rentals, such as, for example, Western Maine Conference rents out USM's field house for track meets, indoor track meets on Friday nights. That's a big expenditure, so that is including in this assessment fees that we pay out to cover awards, rental fees, cost of officials. And so that has a small increase over the last couple of years of 1 to 2%. So when those things are taken into consideration in building this budget, we want to make sure that we're still providing the equitable safety equipment that we do need to have to provide for our student athletes, because my belief is the safety of the equipment is very important. One of the things that we have included in our safety measure is the safety of having our football equipment reconditioned, both helmets and shoulder pads, as well as some of the other hardware stuff that we need to have done yearly as opposed to every other year or every 2 years. So we make sure that that's included. So looking at staffing adjustments or programming adjustments, we did not budget anything for 24-25 for new programs, because right now our programs are pretty healthy. If you look at our athletic participation numbers in the back, you see that it's pretty steadily across the board. Where for the high school, we range anywhere between 63 to 55 to 63%. And a lot of that is because we may have athletes who do one sport but specialize in that one sport. Granted, we'd all like to have them all do 3 sports throughout the year, but sometimes they fall in love with the sport and do the depth of it as opposed to the breadth of doing various different sports. But that's still pretty healthy here for a school that has almost 600 students. Our middle school has a very healthy number. I see that a lot of our biggest number is during the fall and spring is where we have a healthy number. So we are not adding any more, we're not adding any new programs this year. If we do add a program, especially at the high school level, they have co-ops. And what I mean with a co-op is if, let's say, for example, we had a couple girls, young ladies that wanted to play volleyball. So we were able to co-op with Gray New Gloucester down the road and allow them to play. So we have that option with the MPA. That has made it more accessible, as opposed to what it used to be was if you took 2 schools that wanted to have a co-op, you took their population and added together, and a lot of times it jumped them up a class, and nobody wanted that. So now it's based on percentage. So we have those options to look at that. Middle school, I think one of the new things that we just started is we're going to start a middle school unified basketball program here in the month of March. We have a few games, so it'll be very exciting. That has come from the Special Olympics grant, the unified grant that Principal St. Pierre was able to acquire here last month. So that's something that down the road, if we continue building this, we're going to have to put that in the budget to budget for that. But right now, we're very fortunate to have that grant, which will really help out with our unified programs, and it is very, very welcoming to have. So that's kind of where the budget is right now. It's a small budget that, you know, I try to keep factors in mind, such as the increase of our goods, such as equipment that may or may not go up, our uniform costs, how we can balance that off. I know that I talked earlier in November about my goals, and one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to move on to a different uniform vendor called BSN. And what they do is if you change a uniform with a brand, and in this case would be Nike brand, they would give you a $1,500 kickback, which you can use for coaching and other uniforms as well. So I think that's something that we're definitely going to do. That will help kind of bring down the cost of our uniforms. And, you know, we're still talking about potentially moving over there for all of our equipment needs, because there's a little bit of a kickback that will help out with cost as well. So we're looking to expand that, so as the equipment prices kind of go up and some of the things that are hard to move away from, especially external factors such as officials' fees and the fees of having a police officer here, being able to use something that's fiscally responsible will help.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Does anybody? Oh, Kara.
Yeah, I'm wondering, thank you for explaining all of that. I noticed that, so the increase in the budget, or the difference, is $84,000 on, so Article 4, $84,000. Can you share more about how much each of these increases are? And so the three bullets that are in the budget, in the budget form we have here, does that all add up to the $84,000? Can you, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that?
So, for example, like for line for officials, it went up about 6.14% for that. Supplies went up another 1,600 for both middle school and high school, so it was around 4%. Our dues and fees, and that included ambulance and police coverage, went up to 4,300, which is another 8.65. And then salaries of coaches through the contract.
I think Kelly can come up and give a little bit more detail on the money. Thank you.
Okay, I'll tippy toe it because I won't be long. So really, Article 4 is not just made up of athletics, and so it is athletics and co-curricular, and a large part, the largest part of the article, honestly, is really stipends and stipend benefits associated with it, which Eric really had no control over, besides recommending which positions and which coaching stipends were needed. The rest of that is done contractually when we did the educators' collective bargaining agreement. So note that Article 4 is not specifically just athletics. It is co-curricular and athletic. It includes supplies for all those events, officials, all of those types of things, in addition to all of the stipends that we pay for those positions.
Yeah. Okay. Oh. I guess she didn't have a question. Anybody else have a question? Colin.
Thanks so much for this, Eric. It's super helpful. I mean, I think my question is just in the spirit of knowing that across the district that we're looking at sort of what is increasing, and then we're looking at hard cuts. Could you help us understand like what it would look like if we were to make a substantial cut in the athletics budget that would impact the overall budget? I guess what I mean is, would we be talking about like eliminating a program? In other words, like if we really wanted to try to bring this number down, would it be sort of a matter of like, we can't have field hockey anymore, or like we're not going to offer soccer? Like, is it sort of that level? I'm just sort of trying to sort of understand sort of how funding works in that way.
That's a good question. When you cut a program, you end up losing it for a long time. And looking at our numbers, we're very healthy across the board. So I think I would look at other areas before I would cut a program, such as supplies, maybe. I think cutting a program would hurt our student athletes.
I mean, yeah, I completely agree. I think just the again, I think the spirit of the question is just to really say like, what kind of impact are we talking about if we start to make cuts in certain areas? And that's the question that we've been asking of the principals and in terms of the educators. And it does seem like, yeah, I mean, as soon as if you start cutting equipment, game balls, and uniforms, again, that starts to add up as well, in a negative way.
That I think that is an area that it's an area that has some area that you could look at, but cutting a program, I would be more for looking at other areas before the program.
All right. Anybody else? Mara?
Thank you very much, Eric. I guess I would ask for our deliberations if we could see some potential cuts Again, relating to what Eric said, equipment and not programs. I understand how important athletics are to our students.
Anybody else? Kelly?
Yeah, I guess maybe not necessarily cuts, but I would like to see what actual numbers these different categories would sort of the increases that we would be looking at. I think that would be helpful.
Can I ask a clarifying question, just so I make sure we get the what you're asking for? So are you talking, Kelly, on the bottom where Eric was sharing about officials, the official fees, equipment
Correct.
game, so break those out by dollar.
Break those
base.
out by dollar amounts. Yes, that would be helpful.
All right. Guess we're gonna call it good. Thank you. Now I play the Michelle. Where's my agenda? Okay, there it is. All right, so we'll move on. That'll conclude the budget review for tonight, and move on to where are we? 12B, which is I'll take a consideration and approval of second read for the 2025-2026 school calendar. Mara and Kara, thank you. And I think Cynthia is on her way.
And the only reason I wasn't sure is there were no changes from our last read to this read.
Oh, okay. So I don't know what that just, okay. So, all right, then that's pretty straightforward. Does anybody have any questions on the calendar? All right, then I guess I'll take a vote. All those in favor? All right, none opposed?
Thank you.
Thank you. It's very quick. And so we have no new business, no personnel, and we're back to public comment. If anyone has, looks like no one's jumping up, so we'll move along to adjournment. I'll take a motion to adjourn. Kelly and Cheyenne, all those in favor? All right, great. Thank you very much.